Around here, we don't really like cops very much, which is why we don't want them to have all the guns. And that's why we are offering a very popular webinar that is selling out fast. It's called Make Your Own Guns, a guide to 3D printed firearms. And it's taught by one of the stars of the 3D printed world, Control Pugh, otherwise known as Alex Holliday. It'll be meeting every Wednesday in March at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. We right now only have 18 seats left, so you better go now and get your ticket at renegadeuniversity.com. You'll see it on the front page, or you can click on video courses and you'll see it right there. Again, go to renegadeuniversity.com, go to video courses, or see it on the front page. It's called Make Your Own Guns, a guide to 3D printed firearms, meeting every Wednesday in March at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. There are very few tickets left, as I said, and they're going very fast. So do it now, and I hope to see you there. Thank you. This is the Unregistered podcast, and I'm Thaddeus Russell. This is a show about ideas, people, and behaviors that are considered inappropriate, out of bounds, or beyond the pale. The things you're not supposed to talk about if you're a school teacher, a college professor, a businessman, a politician, a parent, a neighbor, or even a podcast host. These are the things you're not supposed to say or even think if you're a good liberal, a good conservative, or a good citizen. Each week, I'll interview a person who has something bad to say. They might be a journalist or a professor. They might be a porn star or a drug dealer. They might just be an ordinary person with an ordinary job who doesn't care about the rules of polite society. I'm not interested in breaking the rules just to be a troublemaker. I'm interested in people who break the rules of conventional thought and to expand the scope of what is possible to say in our society. I'm interested in people who make me think. My guest this week is a violent, white supremacist, fascist insurrectionist, or he's something very different. And you can be the judge. This is my interview with Magnus Panvidya. All right, I am joined by someone I've known about for less than 3 weeks, I believe. So this is Magnus Panvidya, who is in Michigan outside Detroit. Is that right?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. And on January, was it 16th or 17th?
17th.
17th, you and a small group of people who identify as Boogaloo Boys, members of the Boogaloo movement, had a rally at the Michigan State Capitol in Lansing, and you, in front of many, many television cameras and reporters, gave a speech that included a lot of statements that sounded extremely left-wing. And Jimmy Dore found out about this speech and was like, wait a minute, these guys are supposed to be Nazis. Why are they talking about being pro-BLM, anti-cop, anti-war, open borders? This is not Trump Nazis. This is something else. And Jimmy Dore, who's not aware of anything outside the left much, was just trying to, great credit to him for being open-minded and being curious and having you on. And so he had you on the show and you explained your politics, he was just sitting there sort of amazed. Like he did not understand how a person with a gun and a beard in Michigan at a rally at the Capitol could be for those things. Also pro-LGBTQ, just on and on and on. You had done security for BLM protests, right? You'd gotten guns pulled on you during that, right?
Yep.
And he's just sort of blown away by that. Then right after you were on, he had another guest on the show who was a member or the editor of the World Socialist website, I think, which is actually, it's a very prominent Marxist website that I've actually used before. It's not terrible, but he got on there and he was supposed to talk about some strike in New York City. And all he wanted to talk about was how horrible it was that you were on preceding him on a left-wing show. And he said, Jimmy, this guy's a fascist. We cannot have any coalition work with fascists like this. And Jimmy Dore was just like yelling at him. Again, to his tremendous credit, Jimmy just went in on this dude and was cursing him out and calling him an idiot and a loser for basically refusing to form any kind of coalition around any issue with you when they in fact agree with you wholeheartedly on at least a dozen major issues, right?
Yeah, probably like 70% of politics, really.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. And in some ways, you and the Boogaloo Boys are to the left of a lot of socialists, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I watched your door interview, and I also was blown away. I just had a much better sense of your politics because I've been around people like you, and I've heard about the Boogaloo for about 2 years now. I had some friends say to me a couple of years ago, "So Thad, are you down with the Boogaloo?" And I was like, you mean the electric Boogaloo? Hell yeah. And I was like, no, it has to do with guns and things. I was like, maybe, I don't know, but I didn't really know what the politics were. So when I heard
at that point, I wouldn't even know if anyone could like ascribe any politics to it besides like government not take our guns, Okay. At that point,
it was just
2 years ago.
It was a guns rights movement.
Yeah. Well, it's just like the whole meme behind the Boogaloo. If you think of it like as like a zombie apocalypse, essentially, like Boogaloo just means some form of collapse or civil conflict. Everything's gone to hell. Everything's gone sideways.
Okay.
Kind of thing. So you would see Boogaloo memes of like, oh, when the government collapses, I'm going to go train a bear to like attack FBI agents and stuff. Like, just weird, goofy stuff like that. And, a lot of it obviously was kind of based around like gun confiscation. Like, when going all the way back to like, even I think like the late Obama years, even you'd see memes where like when they come take the guns, that's when the Boogaloo starts and stuff like that. So very like non-political, definitely non-racial, like just gun kind of culture stuff.
Right. And Jimmy Dore got into a heap of trouble for having you on his show, was attacked across the left for several days afterward for giving a platform to a white supremacist, to a Nazi, to a fascist, to a Boogaloo Boy, to a Trump supporter. And you're none of those things?
Not even remotely close. Actually, I'm probably like as polar opposite from all of that as you could be. Like, especially even my like personal politics. Like my two favorite kind of philosophical authors are Lysander Spooner, who is a mutualist and a big fan, like a lot of anarcho-capitalists are fans of, and Murray Bookchin, who is a communal socialist.
Yep.
So like fascism to that, I don't even know how you could square that circle. So it's very surreal.
When I was in college in the 1980s, I used to hang out with Murray Bookchin.
No way. Yeah, because I only like really recently discovered him because of leftist Twitter and being like suddenly involved in leftist Twitter. People are like, hey, like, have you heard of like the I think it's Rojava or whatever in Syria and like Murray Bookchin and everything? I'm like, no. And I looked into him. I'm like, hey, I actually like a lot of this. Like, as a guy who votes in the Libertarian Party. So I don't know how like you would try to place me in any political bubble. I'm very much like this weird. We've been joking around lately of just like calling ourselves the platypuses because nobody can really figure out like why or what we are. We're kind of this weird abomination of a bunch of different like political thoughts all merged into one.
I don't know. The ideology I heard sketched out sounded quite coherent to me.
Well, yeah, it's just in terms of like how the left and right try to figure us out, because even though it would be very like obvious to you because like you've been around libertarians, like how libertarians actually are, to like the normal right and left, if they even know what a libertarian is, then they probably assume it's on the right, and they've never heard the term like libertarian socialist, even though those definitely exist. And like from their very binary right left worldview, they have no idea what we are, right, or like how to deal with us. So
right. like the socialist who followed you, who just all he could say was that you were a Nazi. So and I was really excited by what you had to say. A lot of what you said was essentially my politics, and I don't want to be here to just give a platform to people who agree with me. So I'll try to push back, at least play devil's advocate with you. But I'm much more interested in understanding two things. One is the Boogaloo movement, exactly what this is and what it is not. And then I'm very interested in you and your history. And, on this show, we do a lot of that. We do a lot of talking about people's lives and how it connects to their politics now. And I think that often illuminates a lot of how people think, right? And what they think about. So, Yeah, so we set the stage here. So you were on the show, Jimmy Dore's show. You've been on a couple smaller shows since then. The left went freaked out about you on there, dismissed you as a fascist. Jimmy Dore, to his great credit, was yelling at this guy, the socialist, and telling him he was an idiot and a loser. And
Alex Jones infamously played a clip of me and said that I was a CIA infiltrator that was attempting to destroy the country. And then I actually like went on his show and kind of maybe, for lack of a better term, red pilled him a bit on like the actual situation on the ground, and actually got it to the point where he had a BLM activist come on after me and actually had like positive conversations with like a BLM activist. So that was kind of like achieving exactly what we're trying to achieve. We just had a Virginia BLM activist on InfoWars talking about like ending the drug war and stuff together. It was this is what we're trying to accomplish.
Well done.
Yeah, went from him like being super antagonistic to me to that. But because of that InfoWars interview and going on there, then my email was just flooded with far right of like, oh, you queer, like you LGBT, like, racial slurs, race traitor, homophobic slurs, like, awful memes being made of me. And it was like, oh, like this is how it feels to be in the middle, getting attacked from both sides.
Yeah. So let's do it. Let's do it. Yeah, no, I know. I've been there. I am there. Sorry. Actually, I get attacked from both sides all the time. But so do a quick rundown of the, I guess, policy positions or the politics on issues of you and the Boogaloo Boys and the Boogaloo movement. And then let's go back to your childhood. So what do you guys stand for?
Yeah, so it's just kind of very much like a broad anti-government coalition. Like if you go to anybody, that kind of the only unifying thing across the entire movement is guns and the unwillingness to give up guns. But then across that, obviously, we have like this coalition of people that are all like anarcho-socialist all the way to anarcho-capitalists. We have, mutualists. One of my good friends is like an African pan-separatist. Like, like a lot of like really interesting, across both like racial and gender and everything, politics on that. But kind of our uniform principles is like, is the government doing it? Is it oppressing people? Then bad, which is just very simple, like libertarian principles. So, no drug war, ICE detainment centers, bad, religious and minority persecution by the government, bad, gun confiscation, bad. So, I think that's like what trips people up a lot, is because they'll come to me constantly because the left and right are so obsessed with economics. They want to talk about capitalism versus socialism all the time, and they'll come to me and be like, what's your opinion on that? And I'm like, we all have different opinions, because that's not why we're here. Like we're not going here to have an economic or cultural like kind of argument like that. This is explicitly libertarian versus authoritarian kind of movement,
right? And anti-statist, anti-government, essentially, right? And that's what you're sort of looking for. You're looking for instances of the government oppressing people regardless of color and gender and the rest of it, and sexuality, right? And just joining with those people against the state's boot on their neck, right?
Because like even we have a protest planned at a ICE detainment center in Atlanta that we're putting on, and we even have a couple of people from conservative groups that are showing up, and these people like don't want to defund ICE, and they don't want to like open the borders or anything like that. But the reason why they're showing up is because this particular detainment facility had whistleblowers from inside of it that were saying that they were doing involuntary hysterectomies against migrant women. So even the conservatives are like, okay, maybe we don't want to defund ICE or the borders or anything, but they're taking away women's rights to have babies. And as a conservative, I am upset about that. And that's kind of like the instances we look for of like, hey, don't we all think this is bullshit? So can we not at least like address this one thing that we all agree is wrong and just solve this one problem? And then we could just go to the next one problem that we all agree is wrong and kind of just knock them off. And then when we run out of them, we can go back to the endless socialism versus capitalism arguments and everything. But like things have gotten so bad, it's kind of hit this moment where it's like we need to do something about this.
So you're doing coalition politics right now.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what our whole thing has been from the beginning. Because if we wanted to just be a right-wing gun group, there's 100 of those. We could have just joined in with them. If we wanted to just be BLM or be anti-fascist or something like that, we would just go join them. But we're deliberately putting ourselves in probably the most difficult position because we believe that's kind of what needs to happen.
Yeah. It's this is another reason I'm very excited about you, because that's been my sort of overarching political process program for about 10 years now, which is to bring together the left and libertarians around issues that they agree on, which are big, huge issues. And there's many of them, right? And
fundamental things too, like morality and general philosophy and worldviews, like exactly aligned on these. It's not just that like, oh, we don't like these things for a different reason than you do. A lot of the same things, like you said, like if you heard a libertarian talking on certain subjects, you'd be like, oh, this guy's like a communist or something, you know? But no, it's like, you know, it's the fundamental platform of authoritarian versus, you know, libertarian ideals
versus freedom. Yeah. So, all right. So let's get into your history. Is you have a very interesting background, and you and I, again, we have something that's sort of in common here. We both come from parents who were not exactly mainstream, shall we say.
Yep.
So you're a lot younger than I am, but were you, and you said you were sort of raised all over the country in various places?
Well, I spent the first 19 years of my life in the same like middle of nowhere garbage town. And then from there, from being 19 to 27, I lived everywhere. I did all sorts of things. I kind of just, you know, very vagabond lifestyle for a while, and had a lot of like dramatic and extreme events kind of happen over that. They're very like polar opposite of each other. So it's been really weird.
Oh, wow. Okay. So yeah, tell us about where you lived as a child until the age of 19.
Yeah. So I grew up in a tiny little Michigan town. It was like one stoplight, a gas station, a McDonald's, and a grocery store. And that was about it. You know, my graduating class was only like 17 people or something like that. So tiny town, middle of nowhere, northern Michigan. I wouldn't say like very deep South kind of bigoted, but definitely like old white people, old Democrat kind of mentalities. And, you know, obviously, you know, being in the 90s and stuff like that, there was definitely still some kind of prejudice in deep setted kind of things, because it was such a rural area. And my family in particular, my mother was born and raised there, but my dad was from Detroit. And my dad and his sister and my aunt, she had mixed race children. And they all moved from Detroit to this small town, and obvious, you know, them getting beat up and called racial slurs and stuff like that, being like the only, like even vaguely people of color, even though they're only the other half white, still like that was a shock. This is a place to still use like Polak as a racial slur. Like this is how, you know, isolated this is. Right. So when, you know, when you have like, you know, mixed children coming in, it definitely caused kind of a shit storm in the community. And they were treated like, oh, here's these gangbangers from Detroit and everything. Cause like my dad was very much like kind of like a street punk sort of dude, like getting into fights and like drinking and like drugs and stuff like that. Not to like an extreme, like nowadays he'd be considered tame, but like moving into like a rural community with that, like in like the 80s and the 90s and stuff, was like unacceptable. So my family had like kind of like a awkward infamy around it because of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you said they were hippies though.
Yeah. So like definitely like my dad's very much like 60s rock, you know, like pictures of him in short shorts with like flower shirts and stuff like that. Very, you know, just like very, very rock and roll, very attitude. And then my mother was raised on like a farm. So she kind of had like the rural hippie thing of like, you know, just very, very in touch with nature, flower power kind of stuff. So it wasn't full blown, but it was definitely like kind of the foundation of everything. It wasn't a normal sort of family. I didn't have many controls over me growing up, like come home before dark, but you know, 5-year-old me can just go ride my bike around town unsupervised, to where like other kids wouldn't even be able to leave the house in that community, especially if they were women, until like they were 18 years old unsupervised. So I definitely had like a weird kind of out of norm upbringing in that way.
Now, so did I many years before you, but very similar. For you, was it freedom or negligence?
Definitely freedom, because my parents had rules, and they were very fundamental rules, but the punishment for breaking them was like to the point where I would never do them again. I wasn't a perfect kid. I made a lot of mistakes, but I usually only made those mistakes once. So
okay.
And never anything physical. I never got beat or anything like that. But my dad is like a 6'4", like 280 pound, like bald dude with a really deep voice. So like me being a little more like metrosexual and effeminate. If I ever did anything to actually make my dad mad, I'd make sure to never do that thing again. So, you know?
And what were their politics?
So pretty much my dad was very much like non-political and kind of like a closet anarchist. Like he always kind of had like just the fuck the law attitude, very, very like biker punk rock sort of kind of attitude towards everything. And he didn't obviously like raise me to like go commit crimes and screw everything like that. But he always, had this underbelly of the government is screwing you. And he'd always just talk about how like the government is screwing you all the time. And then my mother is kind of like, if I think, because she's kind of apolitical now, but I think in my youth, if someone like Tulsi Gabbard or something was around, that'd be like her kind of jam. Okay. A little more like libertarian left sort of thing. And that was my mother.
Okay. And I mean, it sounds like they were political. How political were they?
Not that like, as in participating in like voting and stuff like that. Like they rarely ever voted. I only think I remembered like once or twice growing up.
I'm talking about real politics, man.
Yeah. But yeah, in terms of like discussion and stuff like that, it never really got brought up around the house unless it was very occasionally, like in the very beginning when I was little, it never get brought up. But then during like the Bush eras and like Iraq war and stuff like that, it was pretty constant of like, why the hell are we over there? Like, because I guess skipping ahead in the story a little bit, we lost our house in the '08 financial collapse. We got foreclosed on and pretty much like blew my entire family apart, caused hell for everybody. Wow. So it was definitely just like this kind of undirected, unrefined, not coming from like the news or whatever, but this just very primal, like fuck the government attitude in my family. Like they weren't like watching like a show like this or like have Fox News on in the background or anything like that. There was no sources of information influencing this. It was like pure life experience kind of politics from them.
Right. But they were aware of how much help the bankers got.
Yeah. And that's definitely where it came from, and the printing of the money and stuff like that. So there was definitely that going on. And my dad, his earliest memory in Detroit was the riots. I think he was only like 3 or 4 years old or something like that when the riots happened that burned all of Detroit down
in '68.
Yeah, when all that happened. So like even he was definitely, I would assume, influenced by the fact that as a small child, Detroit was the Paris of the East. And then he lived through literally Detroit going from Paris of the East to degrading to what Detroit is now. And he was very much just like, that's the government's fault. So,
okay,
like, that's kind of where that all came from.
So you didn't have to go too far to find the politics that you have now.
Not really. Yeah. I feel like it's just a refinement of like that kind of the rural sort of, trying to think of a group would be similar to, I guess, just like White Panther almost ideology, like just like a rural, like screw the government, very Kentucky Union kind of stuff.
But non-racist or anti-racist.
Also. Yeah. That was very mostly because like I think we had one Hispanic kid and then one black man that was adopted and brought into the community. Otherwise, it was bleach white. So like racial politics didn't get involved with it because there was nobody around to have like racial politics about, very isolated, insular community.
Right. So what kind of a kid were you? What were you into? Were you into politics or were you into other stuff?
No, I was, well, I guess technically politics, because I was like a giant environmentalist. Like I was very much like save the whales, like chain yourself to trees, like like, especially as I got later in my life, like in my late teens, like borderline eco-terrorist, essentially. Very, very authoritarian left in terms of like how I would solve the environmental problem. And outside of that, I was just a giant nerd, just video games and like stuff like that. A little bit of art stuff that came a little more later because I'm a professional painter now. But mostly just like the nerdy, awkward dork kid when I was really young. And then when I started growing through that and through like, past that into middle school and stuff like that, that's when a lot of awful shit started happening. And through my kind of discovery of who I was as a person, and that not meshing well with a lot of people. So
a little over 6 years ago, I was in a world of trouble psychologically. I was having obsessive thoughts that were killing my relationship and threatening to kill me. So finally, after many people had suggested it, I tried this meditation app on my phone called Headspace. And I remember the very first session, after 10 minutes of meditating with Headspace, it felt as if the very chemistry in my body had changed. After 2 weeks of it, those obsessive thoughts started to loosen their grip on my consciousness. After a few months, I forgot about them entirely, and I felt like a very different person, a much improved person, and most importantly, a much happier person. Something, by the way, that 10 years of psychoanalytic psychotherapy never gave me. I learned a lot about myself and my childhood, but it never made me feel good. And to me, that's actually what mindful meditation gives you. It allows you to be in the present, right here and right now, which I argue is where pleasure and happiness and freedom reside. Not in obsessive thoughts about the past, not in fearful thoughts about the future where we usually live, but right here and right now, which is where I say you're going to find your happiness. Also, scientific studies, many of them have shown that millions of people agree with me. Millions of people. And the vast majority of people who have tried Headspace have said that their lives were dramatically improved by using it. So go to headspace.com/renegade and get the exact same trial I started with. A free 1-month trial. Headspace.com/renegade. Please do that for me. I promise you, it'll change your life. I guarantee you, it'll change your life, as a matter of fact. And the thing is, once you make yourself happier, the world around you will be a better place for all of us. So again, go to headspace.com/renegade. Just get your free 1-month trial. Try it out. Do it daily. And I swear to God, your life will be better. Thank you so much. What was the awful shit?
So like in the beginning of middle school, that's when I got in touch with the commune. And the commune essentially was just a small group of people. It was run by these old ladies. They were Wiccan, very just like hippie lefty kind of thing out in the middle of nowhere. And I started getting involved with them. And then it came out, like, I started realizing, like, hey, I think I might like both boys and girls.
Oh.
And I played that really close to my chest because of that. And so it was like, okay, I just kind of adopted paganism, because that wasn't like an influence from my family. That was an outside influence. My family was just like very agnostic. Like, it just never got brought up. They just didn't care. Religion it wasn't even a talking point in the family. So it was like, I just became pagan in a very Christian community. And I also have like unacceptable sexuality. And I'm also like a weird, nerdy kid. So like definitely all throughout middle school, kind of, if people ever found out about it, getting beat up, getting bullied, having like my property destroyed, plenty of girls that I was dating that would be like forced to break up with me because their parents would realize that I was pagan and their Catholic daughter can't be dating no heathen. And that kind of all like solidified when I don't remember if it was 9th or 8th grade, but they had the day of silence, which was like the LGBT, like you don't talk that whole day to like raise awareness for like LGBT violence and everything. I decided to like come out essentially at that. And I wore a piece of cardboard over my face that had "Bi and Proud" on it with duct tape on it. And I walked into school, and the next months and years after that was getting jumped, like coming home from school and getting the shit beat out of me. And like, very, very much like that kind of, very, very similar story. I think anyone who could tell you of just, being terrified to go to school. Like, it got to the point where I had to switch schools, and I went to a charter school instead of a public school because they would, bad memories. They would, what would happen the most is I developed like a phobia of going to the public bathrooms, because I would go into the public bathroom and these boys would come in and flick the lights off and then just beat the shit out of me in the bathroom. And like, my mom and everything would go to like the council and the faculty and stuff like that and be like, why aren't you like helping my son? And they would just not do anything about it. I don't know why they didn't do anything about it, but it got to the point where like my father had to come in and literally like scream at the like the principal came out and the superintendent came out and like all the teachers like came out of like the teacher's office because it was during lunch and it was just my dad, like huge, biker looking dude just screaming at them like, you're a bunch of losers. I can't believe this. You'll fuck yourself. And then I left that school and went to a charter school for like a year because it had gotten the bullying had gotten like so bad that like even outside of school, I would not go into a public restroom because I was just so like, I get borderline anxiety attacks, like walking into a public restroom because I was just waiting for like the lights to flick off and suddenly like a bunch of people just beat the fuck out of me. So that was my experience, like all through like middle school and high school of just like, people, driving by, like I'd be like walking to the grocery store or something and like a truck would drive by and yell faggot out the window or something at me. And just like a lot of that. And being such a small like community, like you can't, where do you go? Like I have maybe 100 people in my high school total across all the grades. Like, like there isn't like a new friendship group you're going to discover. You suddenly become loved and accepted. So I kind of ran around with like the misfits and the stoners and like the nerdy kids that played Dungeons and Dragons and stuff like that. And that was my social circle.
Oh man, I'm so sorry to hear that.
Yeah, it was not the best of times, definitely.
But man, you came out of it like a rocket,
Yeah. I mean, like that all happened, and then I graduated high school, and I went to college. I went to college for trade school technically for massage therapy because my mother has fibromyalgia. So I kind of like the whole time I was growing up was like giving her like back rubs and stuff because she was always in pain. And I couldn't figure out what I was going to do with my life. I'm like, well, I've been giving my mom like massages and stuff like my whole life. Go to massage therapy school. So I went and did that. And then after I graduated, I came back home and made like a decent amount of money, like working on like yachts and stuff like that for like private clients and stuff, like doing massage therapy. And then a lot of stuff happened in terms of like my housing situation. My mom and dad had gotten a divorce at that point, and a lot of other things were kind of going on in the background. My dad moved back to Detroit. So I essentially like had a moment where I got kicked out of the house I was staying at. And for about 2-3 months, I was homeless, living like in and out of my car, like crashing on friends' couches, not like homeless, not like sleeping in like a bag on the street. I would, probably 2/3 of that time I was on somebody's couch or another, but like no possessions, no house to call my own. Didn't really know what to do with myself in Northern Michigan. And eventually got to the point where my dad was like, hey, just come down to Detroit, like leave finally. So that's when I was 19. I left and I moved to Detroit. And that kind of began like a more positive like stretch of my life. But yeah. And when I got to Detroit, that's when like activism, like real activism started, not just like hippie, like, oh, we're going to go clean up the river with like all the garbage out of it because we love the environment, like getting like attacked by the police activism. That's that's when that started, is when I moved to Detroit.
Okay. Yeah. And you were moving there right when Detroit was kind of having sort of a renaissance in various ways. And people,
I moved there like right when the bankruptcy was declared.
Oh,
so that was kind of like the peak moment of like everything had gone to hell. Oh, okay. It's improved so much since then, but I definitely went there at like, if it was the stock market, the very bottom of where it went,
Well, I was thinking about, it's been, I guess, about 20 years now, since a lot of sort of hipsters and lefty sort of organizers have flooded into Detroit, as far as I can understand.
Yeah.
Right?
And that's who I ran into. And that's where like my politics started, like actual like politics.
Yeah.
And particularly I started with the Turn on the Water marches in Detroit, which were the protests over like the Detroit city shutting off people's water and everything all across there and leaving people without water during the winter and a bunch of awful shit like that. So I ran around with these group of lefty kids that had taken over abandoned buildings in Detroit and made a commune called Fireweed, which I still think's there. I haven't checked into it. But it was but Dr. Bob from Normal, the medical marijuana legalization thing, he helped run that commune. So I ran around with them in the Turn on the Water marches. I participated in like kind of proto BLM marches at that point, but along the same kind of ideology, and even marched with BAM, By Any Means Necessary, which was kind of like proto Antifa in a way, So that was like the crowd that I was running around with. And we were doing stuff like taking stolen water keys and going to people's houses after their water got turned back off and turning it back on.
Ooh.
So then they started putting cages over them. So then we started coming out with angle grinders and cutting the cages off and turning their water back. So like I said, like borderline like eco-terrorist shit. Like, you know, definitely pushing the lines.
I mean, that reminds me more of like what was going on in the 30s in Detroit, where there was a whole lot of working class self-help going on. People defending other working class people from the cops and from the city and from
very similar. But there was also because it was related to water, there was a lot going on with like the Nestle Bottling Corporation and all the and then Flint around that same time too. So like the whole water situation was just god awful, and I was in deep with that and running around with that because there's an organization called the Water Women. I'm not sure if they still around, but it's based out of the Native American community in Michigan, where their whole thing is they view themselves as like tenders of the Great Lakes and stuff like that. It's very spiritualistic. And I don't have that much Native American in me, but I have enough that I was enrolled in the Native American education program for Michigan. So through that, I met like the actual like people at like legit powwows and like meetings and stuff like that. And then that's how, like when I heard the Water Women were involved in that, I was like, hey, I know these people. Like, let's go screw over this giant, you know, Nestle Bottling Corporation that's draining all the Great Lakes and selling the water to China and like screwing everything over and causing all this ecological damage.
Oh, I was going to ask you, what was happening with the Detroit water? I don't know this issue. What was going on?
Literally, people weren't paying their bills. It's not like it was like the people themselves were very innocent. But the issue is that Michigan has extraordinarily high water bills, despite being surrounded by the most fresh water on the planet.
Yeah.
Like you pay a ridiculous amount for the water. And all these hundreds and hundreds of Detroit residents had run up negligent water bills because it's more expensive than electricity. It's more expensive than gas in some cases. Like Charlevoix County, for example, like people on the regular get like $200 water bills for a family of 3. You know, ridiculous. But the main issue and the thing that made people really mad is that it came out that like GM and Chrysler and like Red Wing Stadium and all like these corporate entities were not paying any water bill at all. And they had run up like hundreds and thousands of dollars of like negative deficit on there, but you know, they're in with the government, so that's okay. And that kind of just like snapped, especially to the left. Like we view that from a left-wing perspective, like unacceptable. You're shutting off normal people's water, but General Motors can be like $1 million late on a water bill, and you're not even like going after them. Right. So that just kind of broke people. And I actually got to meet Mark Ruffalo. He came down to an event there, the guy who plays the Hulk now in the Avengers. And I actually like got to like talk to him, and like he used my megaphone at a speech and stuff like that. I got pictures of that on my Twitter, so that was super cool.
Wow.
Yeah,
I can't stand Mark Ruffalo, but that's okay. I like
his politics can be interesting for sure, but it was still cool. I was just like, I don't even know if he was the Hulk at that point, but it was like looking back now and being like, this dude was like in the biggest Hollywood movie of all time. And just a couple of years ago, I was standing there like having a bullshit conversation with him, you know?
Amazing. Yeah.
Amazing. World works weird.
Yes. So where were you living during this time? Were you squatting?
In Detroit, I was living with my father in like a tiny trailer, essentially. Him and his, I don't know if they were married at that point, but who is now his new wife. I was living in there. Was
it a trailer on 8 Mile?
No. This was just outside of Detroit in a town called Madison Heights. So it was like 11 mile ish. So not in the city, but not very far away from the city either.
Okay. Yeah. I have spent quite a bit of time in Michigan. My father is from Flint. I dated for a long time a woman from Bloomfield Hills. Very different than Detroit.
Yeah, very different from Detroit.
And my dissertation was on Jimmy Hoffa and the Teamsters in Detroit. So
yeah, it's so funny how like people like me and you that have our mentality, so many of them happen to come from Michigan, which I have like a crazy theory about like what is going on in Michigan. But I even talked to a guy that's from the People's Party in Texas, and like he's the very same thing. He's like, oh, I love the unity coalition idea. I really want to get the left and right to work together. And through the conversation, he was like, oh yeah, I grew up in Michigan. And I was like, was like, what is in the water in Michigan that like creates these weird, like, you know, this coalition idea, this crossing party lines idea. Because I meet so many people that are like anarchists and libertarians in Michigan, and it's like, what's going on here? There's something about it.
we know what's in the water in Michigan.
Yeah. My theory, essentially the short version of it, is like, if you grew up in Michigan, you've seen both parties spectacularly fail. And then, like, you know, being a purple state, like, it's like, oh, the Republicans are coming in to fix all the issues, and then everything gets worse. And then, like, we had like Granholm, Snyder, Whitmer, and it's just been like this never ending chaotic tumble of the government just screwing everything up and promising to fix the roads my whole life, and still having a pothole that'll eat my Prius outside my house, kind of thing.
Right.
So
okay. So yeah. So you're living in a trailer with your dad in Madison Heights, is it called?
Yeah.
Yeah. And were you working? What was your day?
Yeah, I was working for a demolition company with my dad, and that was like, I still love that job because we'll just put headphones in and break shit. It was great.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was great. That was actually like my first like actual job really, because I bounced around between the usual like fast foods and grocery stores and stuff like that, and never really managed to remain employed for like longer than a month, because I have very extreme issues with authority, and I have kind of a mouth on me. So, but I got to stick with that job just because it was just like a bunch of dudes that were like smoking weed on like work sites and like blasting music, very casual, but at the same time, like professional in the sense of doing good quality work. So that I like that balance. So that was probably the job I've held the longest in my life.
So you were like just taking sledgehammers to walls and stuff?
Yeah. We were essentially like going around places like Bloomfield Hills and stuff. And these rich people would just be like, oh, I want to remodel the whole bathroom. So we would just tear the entire bathroom apart, throw it all in a dumpster, and then go home. That's essentially
that sounds like a really fun job, actually.
Yeah. I mean, obviously very physically demanding. And like there might be moments with like insulation and stuff where it's kind of gross and like water damage. It's particularly when we had the giant flood that happened in Detroit years ago, where like the freeway was totally underwater and stuff. There was a bunch of water damage work, but it was definitely like a blast of just, you know, break shit.
And it also kind of fits with your politics too, you know?
Yeah, a little bit. I see that.
Not that you're just interested in destroying things, but there's a radical demolition that you want to undertake, right?
Interesting. You're making me think about myself in an introspective way now. I like it. Okay.
That's what we do here on the show,
man.
Yeah. And talk about your name. This is your obviously.
Okay. So
name?
Definitely not my legal name. So this was the name that I made up on the commune, and it kind of has like some identity stuff wrapped up into it because I guess it's doxed enough that I don't care. My actual name is Zach, Zack, and when I started going through all those abuses, I kind of went through this dissociative thing, and I started going by Zakari instead of Zach. And it was sort of like this purging of an old identity. Like, I'm not the kid that was beat up all the time in school anymore, sort of thing. Like I was trying to like reinvent myself in a way. So I even changed my name and like what I wrote it down on and everything. And then on the commune, it was just required. You're supposed to have like your Wiccan name. You're supposed to just make one up that isn't your real name. So I kind of threw a bunch of, because I'm a big fan of mythology and history. I've always been like a really huge history nerd. So I tried to make like these three different cultures and put them together. So you had Magnus, which is Latin, which, you know, the great, and then Pan for the Greek god Pan of like chaos and panic and uncertainty. So that was Greek. And then the Sanskrit word which is Vidya, which means like perfect knowledge or true knowledge or like the absolute truth. So in my you know, edgy emo brain, you know, I was like the great and chaotic search for the pure truth, essentially, is what the name's supposed to mean.
I mean, you just put a lot of pressure on yourself, but that's okay. That's a lot to live up to.
Yeah, I just threw it together because I thought it was just cool. I'm like, oh, cool words put together with cool meanings, you know.
Let me say something.
It kind of became a little self-fulfilling.
Yeah. You know? How many years were you tortured for being bi?
So people started finding out when I was in 7th grade, and then I came out. I don't remember if it was 9th or 10th grade. because no, okay, it was the end of 9th grade, because halfway through 10th grade is when I left school because they had gotten so bad. And then I still lived in that town. So kind of like the harassment and abuse continued until like halfway through my senior year. And then, I don't know what happened. I think it's because I started smoking weed, and like a lot of the preppy kids and like the jocks and everything also smoked weed. Okay. So I guess like, it's stoner culture. Like you usually don't say no to a bowl of weed. You're going to hang out with whoever has it. You're not going to be very picky. That like it kind of humanized to them. So like most of my senior year, I didn't get like the shit beat out of me, but definitely from like 7th to 11th grade was just persistent. Like, I could think of plenty of times of these two kids jumped me and grabbed my bike and threw it in the lake. People stealing my backpack, flushing school supplies down the toilet. Just like I hung out at the library a lot because I was like a nerdy kid. So like I had to walk through this set of woods to get home from the library. And like they would like people would like hit me with sticks and shit and like chase me through the library. It's not, yeah, not good.
This is so that story makes me furious, but what is behind you in your room right there makes me happy as hell, because right there you've got, what kind of rifle is that?
That's an AR-15. So Palmetto State Armory AR-15.
Yeah, I thought it was an AR-15 right next to a rainbow flag that says "Don't tread on me," and that is the answer. That is the Stonewall answer, isn't it?
Yes.
The great news is that so many of you have become Paloma Verde customers that they actually ran out of stock last week. They were sold out for a few days, but they have re-upped with their suppliers and they are ready to fulfill your orders. The thing that sold out first was the unregistered combo pack, otherwise known as the Thad Pack, which contains my 3 favorite products. That includes their gummies. This is my newest jar. It is now half empty. Delicious fruit-flavored gummies with 10 milligrams of CBD per. It tastes like candy. Their soft gels. This is the good medicine, the heavy medicine, 25 milligrams of CBD per soft gel. And I've told you many times that I take between 2 and 6 per day, all depending on what politicians are saying to me. Their high potency tincture, though, is my very favorite thing. I put several drops under my tongue. It helps me fall asleep every night. I am so grateful for this. The other thing I got to tell you about, though, and I think they sold out of this as well, but it's back in stock, so you can order it too. And by the way, you can order the unregistered combo pack. They're all ready to go. They were just briefly out of stock because of you crazy people just last week, as I said. Look what I did. Just a couple of nights ago, I managed to pour a pot full of boiling water right onto my hand. Good news is that Paloma Verde has exactly what I needed for it, which is THC-free CBD salve. I've told you guys about their hand cream, which I'm telling you is the best thing for dryness. But this salve is wonderful for actual, wounds. Go to Paloma Verde CBD. Their website is palomaverdestore.com. Use the discount code RENEGADE. You get 25% off every single product in their store. The unregistered combo pack, you get 33% off. Again, palomaverdestore.com. Use the discount code RENEGADE. Your body's going to feel better, you are going to feel better, and your life is going to feel better. I thank you.
That's probably like one of the main reasons I'm the biggest fan of yours is because especially growing up in the Native American community, around because we had a reservation not far from where I grew up in northern Michigan. There's definitely elements of the Native American community that absolutely despise how they are painted as victims and helpless and were like peaceful and never did anything wrong. And then the white man came and just destroyed them, when to them, they're like, no, we were warriors. Like we fought. We killed a lot of white people. We took a lot of scalps, and you're trying to reduce us to this sniveling, pathetic, helpless people. And it's like, no. And that definitely echoes in a lot of your work of a lot of these groups fought like hell And it's like that's kind of been buried in history. Like we don't talk about that anymore.
Yeah, you had drag queens in 1969 throwing fists and bricks at New York City cops,
beating the hell out of them, putting them in
hell
the
out-
hospital. Like,
and everyone needs to know this: winning.
yeah,
They
yeah.
won. After 2 days, the cops gave up. New York City stopped harassing gay bars, and then over the next 3 or 4 years, basically every municipality in the United States stopped that practice as well of raiding gay bars.
Yeah, they were terrified of the great violent gay uprising. Like, you know, that's how the government looked at it. So
it's not something I would recommend for my son or someone I loved, because it is definitely dangerous. But unfortunately, sometimes the only way to stop the cops is to make them afraid.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of like the whole philosophy behind the Boogaloo of like us showing up with rifles and everything. Is every single event we were at where they were opposing police, the police acted totally different the moment we were there. They were terrified to go after these protesters because at the end of the day, like, they are regular people. This is just a job. It's a paycheck. It's not some like crazy moral standard. They don't want to get shot over it. So like, they'll beat the hell out of a skinny hippie with a sign, whatever, because what's the worst thing that's going to happen to them? But then you see kind of like what happened around the federal building riots in Portland, of where you had like U.S. Marshals and stuff that were terrified of kids with laser pointers and bricks and fireworks, and these are like military dudes. These aren't police. These are federal agents. And like, they were scared shitless of this crowd of skinny college kids.
That's right.
For the exact reasons you're talking about.
That's why we are offering a course on making 3D printed guns.
Ooh, I actually have a 3D printer right there. So
I figured you might.
Yeah.
And people have said to me, "Oh my God, you're promoting violence." And I'm saying, well, if you look at the violent crime rate since the 1990s, it has plummeted, and gun ownership of legal guns and DIY guns has skyrocketed at the very same time.
And they're starting to have problems in Europe of kind of like, it's a giant unreported story of the last 2 years of, if you actually look for it, there's a ton of articles in like Germany and like Sweden and stuff like that, where they're starting to have problems with 3D printed guns.
Oh yeah.
Because of it, like there's no statute of limitations that says only Americans can 3D print guns. So there are tons of Europeans that are suddenly like, have never had the ability to access a firearm. They're just making their own at home. And the government's starting to have a problem with it because there's functionally no way to stop it. There's nothing they can do about it. And they're terrified.
Yeah.
And like, even like Control Pew and a lot of these websites and collectives that are based around they're European.
He's teaching our course, Control Pew.
Yeah. A lot of the people involved in those circles are European. They're not even Americans. So like, there's a lot of Europeans teaching Americans how to do 3D printed guns. So that whole situation across the pond is going to get out of their control very rapidly. And I'm watching it very closely. I'm very intrigued in that. Yeah.
Because they are very scared of guns in Europe. And they think it's just absolutely wild that Americans have guns.
Besides the Swiss, which we never talk about the Swiss.
That's right.
Like even like right. they have a really weird government that's not like any other government. They have a very weird political and social system that's not like that. And they're also the only European country where like people own private fully automatic weapons.
That's right.
We don't talk about the Swiss.
I think aren't they required to own guns? I think they are.
They have the military gives every adult a rifle, but they're not allowed to keep it at home. I don't think. I think they keep it either they keep it, or you're not allowed to have the ammunition for it. But you can still, outside of that, privately purchase your own firearms. And their laws are very similar to like kind of like what a purple state like Michigan or something would have. Not totally free and fair. Like there's background checks and stuff like that, but actually way more lax than some places like New York and California. And they're a European country. So that's just sorry for the aside. I'm just really intrigued by that whole.
No, I didn't know that. That's totally fascinating. And now that we're in business with those people, I need to know that. So, all right, back to the story. So you moved to Detroit when you're 19, lived with your dad, and you became enmeshed in the war against the water company.
Yeah, pretty much.
and I guess some similar kinds of issues. What else were you doing in your early 20s?
Yeah, so that's when like the anonymous movement really started like picking up. So I ended up organizing, not very successfully, but I ended up putting on both years of the Million Mask March in Detroit. And definitely that's when I started being aware of people like Julian Assange and like Edward Snowden and WikiLeaks and all that kind of sphere of everything. Okay. Started watching like Alex Jones videos, discovered people like you and other stuff of kind of these like buried anti-government kind of things of like, oh, you know, it's not just because I was very left wing. It's like, oh, it's not just capitalism. Like there's a bunch of other things going on in the world of like a lot of shady cabals and stuff like that.
Right.
And getting more into history and learning about stuff like Operation Gladio over in Europe and all these kind of, because I was a giant student of history. So it kind of really radically changed my worldview when suddenly, because of the advent of the internet, I'm like, oh my God, like so many weird things that happen in history that as like a history kid that I'd go and get a book from the library or something, I'd be like, why did this happen? This doesn't make sense. And then like some random guy on YouTube's like, hey, here's like a bunch of details they don't teach you about, you know, the example, your book being a perfect example of that. And it was kind of like, that is what tipped me fully over to where I stopped identifying as kind of like a Bernie Sanders socialist, I guess what would be analogous to then, and just like went full like libertarian anarchist essentially. And just like radically went from like the top left, like all the way down to like anarchism essentially, and was like, oh, the government can't be trusted to do this, and it doesn't matter who's in control of it. Like it, you know, it wouldn't matter if it's Adolf Hitler, George Bush, or Stalin in charge of a system like this. It's going to be bad no matter what. And I definitely like fell into anarchism through that.
Now, this socialist who was on Jimmy Dore's show right after you, you know, he insisted on calling you a Nazi, and the evidence for that was that you and the Boogaloo Boys were opposed to the lockdowns.
Yes.
And I think that was it.
Yeah.
But I strongly suspect, because I was born and raised a socialist, I've been around socialists my whole life, that really the problem he has, and it's funny, they didn't actually discuss this, but it's that you guys, aren't you also essentially anti-socialist?
And like in a sense, we're definitely anti-state socialists. Some of us in general might be anti-socialist, like completely, like the ANCAPs and the more libertarian guys. Yeah. But then obviously also you have like anarcho-socialists, Boogaloo Boys, and like mutualists, and like whatever the hell you want to call me, like a communalist libertarian. I still haven't figured out how to even label myself. So, and I definitely think that they don't like it because it's the same way that like socialists hate anarcho-communists. They just kind of don't talk about it.
Right.
Is they're very corporate, very power structures, very like direct democracy and committees and that kind of socialism. And they don't like the people that are like pure people party, pure communists, like, you know, the pure version of communism is like an anarcho-communist might say. They don't like them either, you know? So what's your position on markets then? What do you markets? So I have a really weird belief of I don't know what to call it, and I don't know if anyone's came up with the idea before me, probably because nothing's original. But I'm a radical decentralist is the one thing I call myself, where I don't think any system can operate on the scale that U.S. countries are now, and even some states. Like everything needs to be broken down to much smaller chunks. But then within those smaller chunks, I'm very much a like, whatever, as long as, if not the entire community, then the vast majority of the community agrees to a system and it's voluntary and you can leave that community at any point, they can pick whatever system they want. So it's very much like a unity-based thing of like, if there could be one town that's an anarcho-communist town that's like a direct democracy and nobody owns anything, and they could live peacefully and happily next to the next town over that's like the anarcho-capitalist paradise. So that's kind of my view. It's sort of mutualism, but also not really, of just it doesn't matter what the system is as long as it's a voluntary system and it's on a small scale, if that makes sense. That's kind of my philosophy.
Oh, I'm totally with you.
Which you could probably see like the Book Chin and the Lysander Spooner and stuff like that, like
for sure
in that.
For those who don't know Murray Bookchin, which is going to be almost everybody, he was he called himself an anarchist, a left-wing anarchist though, and he was particularly interested in what he called ecology. He didn't call it environmentalism. And he was sort of an intellectual leader of the radical edge of the ecological or environmentalist movement in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, kind of peaking when I was in college in the 80s, and all my buddies were Bookchinites in my college. So and I was sitting in a room with Murray several times listening to him talk.
Nice.
But yeah, and he was great on a lot of things. In one of the, as a lefty, you know, he was essentially a decentralist, opposed to the welfare state, hated Franklin Roosevelt and the New Deal, And he was really good in his critiques, I thought, of the clear misanthropy in the environmentalist movement. He spent a lot of time going after environmentalists for their misanthropy. They hated people.
Yeah.
I mean, they like the earth much more than people.
And that was me. Like, that was me when I was a kid. This is when I say like eco-terrorist, I'm like kill the oil companies, like murder. I was, like, I get eco-fascist obviously doesn't apply because I'm super left wing, but like in the sense of like authoritarian environmentalism, very much so.
I'm blanking on the name of the Desert Solitaire guy. What was his name?
Oh God, I know who you're talking about. I can't remember too. I haven't heard that brought up in years. That's so surreal.
He was the main. God, what was that guy's name? Anyway, he was the main intellectual who was the main explicitly misanthropic.
Yeah.
So I mean, human beings were the problem who needed to be reduced or eliminated so that
like controlled breeding and like to the extreme,
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if he spelled it out like how we were going to do this, but other environmentalists did. They wanted the Chinese model.
Yeah.
Like Paul Ehrlich and company wanted us to have the one child rule here, have the government dictate how many children we could have.
And they were advocating that in like Congress and stuff in like the early 2000s, even like up to like that recently. You had the occasional person like come up and be like, hey, maybe that one child policy, maybe we could do that here. And obviously it never caught steam in conservative, George Bush America, but like you definitely had that element.
Same with climate change. So a lot of the climate change people have explicitly said they want the Chinese model because China stopped their CO2 emissions basically cold about 5 or 6 years ago, because they have a command and control economy. So if they just like snap their fingers, they can stop all the smokestacks overnight, right?
Yeah. And particularly like reducing the population and not breeding helps that extremely. Takes a lot of resources to raise a child.
Yeah. So a lot of people in the Sierra Club and other very mainstream organizations like that love the Chinese form of government. Let's just remember that.
Yeah.
So, okay. So take us from you running around in I said San Diego. That's a very Detroit. running around in Detroit, protecting people's water and getting involved further and further into sort of radical politics. How did you get from there to the Boogaloo Boys?
Okay. So then became like the real crazy like part of my life. I met a radical feminist girl, like extreme, like in liberal arts, lived in Chicago, like what's her name? The feminist author that doesn't capitalize her first name. I can't remember.
Well, there's Bell Hooks.
Yeah, Bell Hooks, like a very like devoted Bell Hooks fan and everything. Yep. And like I had always kind of been very, I guess, I don't know, progressive in the sense of like not being shitty to women and not being sexist, because I was the weird gay kid that got beat up and everything. So I was hanging out with mostly women. Like my friendship group was mostly women.
Right.
And I met her, and that I lived in Chicago for a while and started experiencing kind of like what people would describe as the boutique left and stuff like that. The very urban, the very wealthy, like privileged left that literally every single person on the planet is a Nazi, and like the microaggressions and stuff like that taken to the most extreme of every single thing.
This is the highly educated left.
Yes. By the way. This is Rose Twitter in a nutshell, essentially.
Yes.
And like, I just got really turned off from left wing at that point. Like that was kind of like the official moment where, on top of all of these kind of libertarian and anarchist influences that were coming into my life, like experiencing like, oh, I'm in the big city with the big city left. And a lot of these people are like racist. They're like really, really bad people, and they're majority white, and they like tokenize people extremely. And they like have like a lot of it is just making up for extreme, like bigoted beliefs on things and stuff like that. And a lot of virtue signaling and no action. And I was kind of like, yeah, I'm over this. Like, I'm not going to identify as left anymore. I'm an anarchist. I'm just straight down. Like, I don't associate with that. Because I grew up around like the very authoritarian right in my hometown of like being beat up for being gay and everything like that. And then moved like to Chicago and experienced the very authoritarian left and saw like extraordinary parallels between them. Like the language changed and like their epistemology changed and what they were drawing for a change. But like a lot of the attitudes of just hating the other, like a just deep-seated hate for the other and defining themselves by hatred of the other. Right. And I was like, screw that. So I broke up with her, and then And then a girl I'd talked to almost my entire life, because I was on the internet a lot when I was growing up, just being a nerdy kid. I got a computer when I was like 13. I was like playing like World of Warcraft and stuff. There had been a girl I'd been talking to since I was like 14 that we reconnected, and she moved to Chicago, and we started like dating and got married. And then yeah, not like in the terms of we being like hating the government people. We didn't go and like get it officially stamped and whatever, but like we called each other husband and wife. So, and we were together for many years.
Okay.
And through her, we went and traveled the entire country, like living out of the back of our car for 2 months. We lived like 37 out of the 50 states, and moved to Nashville. And then I lived in Nashville for a year, and kind of like nothing happened there really. Like I just worked the same job. There's no politics or anything going on. And then I moved back to Detroit from Nashville, and we broke up and weren't together anymore. And obviously like the kind of depression and stuff like that of like a 4-year relationship exploding and all that. And right at the end of that, when like I was finally starting to like maybe move on from it and everything, coronavirus, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Duncan Lamb, like that's when all of that happened.
Okay.
So
so I'm guessing that the good thing about that stuff is it might have like rousted you out of your depression. Is that
absolutely?
Okay.
I definitely like kind of gave me a point of living, sort of, because I'm a hopeless romantic. I'm so awful in relationships, of just being very not codependent, but like breakups always like destroy my little heart, essentially. I guess I could put it like I don't get over them really well. I don't deal with them really well. So like that everything happening was like, oh hey, like maybe I can find a purpose again, because I've kind of spent the last 4 years like the only thing I was living for was like to have a life with someone else, and now it's just me and I have no purpose. And that's when like the Boogaloo stuff and everything and the lockdowns and all that started happening. And I guess we could like get into that, of where that brings us to modern day. That was just a year ago. So
I was going to say, yeah, this is all very recent actually. You were in a pretty serious depression not long ago.
Yeah. Like very, very like borderline suicidal, like just over it. Like, yeah.
Yeah, you've had a rough go with with your sex life, haven't you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. 100%. And in all forms and assets of it, definitely.
You know, you strike me as very, not excessively, but very sensitive in a really good way, like emotionally sensitive and quite articulate. And we would call it emotionally intelligent also, I think. And I think the fact that you did feel those feelings, even though they were terrible feelings, so intensely, and you're able and willing to talk about them publicly like this, suggests, I think, a lot about your politics, as a matter of fact, because your politics is, some of it's self-interested, and that's not a bad word, by the way.
Right. Absolutely not.
And it started out as essentially protecting your guns from the government, right? The Boogaloo movement. But, all these other things, some of it is self-defensive because, you're identify as queer and, but you're not Black.
Yeah.
Right. But you take guns to protect Black Lives Matter protesters. Right. I mean, that's a pretty serious commitment on behalf of other people, which, by the way, libertarians, I don't know if you know this, they don't care about other people.
Yeah, it's actually that's my biggest, like, because I love libertarians the most, and it's my biggest circle is libertarians. But I definitely like my harshest critique of them is like, you guys need to get out of your houses and like get involved in the world more. Like, you guys stop being like the shut-in neats essentially, and get out there and kind of, because that's so funny, because the Boogaloo is like the first time that so many people are even like introduced to the concept of what a libertarian is, like going out to these BLM protests and talking to all these people and everything. Like a lot of people on the ground, and particularly like in the urban centers and stuff, never even heard the word before, let alone the left wing version of it or the right wing version of it. So that kind of, like, that's why in contact with many people like Spike Cohen and Vermin Supreme and stuff in the Libertarian Party, being like, hey, this is working. We should do this more. Actually get out of the basement and go talk to human beings in human situations and go to protests and stuff like that.
Yeah. I'm very critical of BLM for a lot of reasons. I don't like them at all, actually. And I think they're very damaging to the cause of criminal justice, in fact. But what you did, I don't think we've talked about this. We talked about this, I think, before we recorded, but we haven't talked about Duncan Lemp and Breonna Taylor yet.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Right.
So
that the fact that you did that, and we can talk about what you did in a second. But see, to me, your whatever you want to call it, your emotional accessibility and vulnerability and like just your self-knowledge, I think is what's required for someone to have that idea, in fact, why don't you say what you did? I mean, uniting, bringing together those two cases at a BLM march, which I think is just exactly what needs to happen and is exactly what has not been happening, because BLM insists on making it only about Black people when, in fact, as you're about to find out, everyone's about to find out, we all know this already, that white stuff happens to white people that's just as bad or worse every single day at the hands
right.
of
Absolutely. And like there definitely is there is specific racial issues in America that 100% still exist, and they haven't gone away or anything like that. Sure. But there also needs to be an understanding from the right especially and the left that, like, exactly like you said, of this is very much turned into a class warfare kind of thing.
Yeah.
100%. And, the people that understand that, the people that only view it in a economic version of left versus right don't get it. And the people within both like groups like the Proud Boys or even like neo-Nazis and then like the worst elements and parts of BLM make it a purely race thing. Mm-hmm. The people that get it, like Jimmy Dore, like you, like me, and everything, that are trying to work together, understand that is very much top versus bottom and is happening to everybody. Yep. And that doesn't diminish, like, I'm not like an all lives matter kind of person. Like, that doesn't diminish how like there's specifically unique things going on in like the Black community and stuff that is wholly unique to them and I can't relate to. But a lot of things are happening to everybody and it's awful to everybody. And it's kind of something we need to like just get our shit together on. Like my entire life, I haven't seen a positive change in the government, really. I couldn't point to like a single moment where I'm like, and this was a period where everything got better in America. Like it has been this constant downward spiral of economic oppression, of police oppression, of the police state growing, of ever expanding and ever growing war and bombing and multiple financial collapses. And it's just like kind of, where my affiliation with like the Boogaloo thing comes from is like I kind of feel like that concept of like the Boogaloo, of the civil collapse, of like the soft civil war and everything is already happening. Like if you look at like the period they call the Troubles over in Ireland, like that was over like 60 plus years and is considered like this horrific thing. And it was a civil war and everything. What was the Troubles? Car bombings. We've had 2 of those, police getting shot at, police killing protesters, riots, two factions that cannot align together or talk to each other at all, having secular violence in the street. Like, we're living in the Troubles. Like the Boogaloo is already happening. Wow. So that's kind of how I view it. Yeah. And that we're trying to just like pump the brakes on that and realize that like radical and probably violent change is coming to America very shortly. And we can either do it together as the people versus this kind of corporate and government entity that's just destroying everything. It's military industrial complex, the NSA and all these things. We can do it together, or we can break into a million factions and essentially turn America into probably what it would be like, in my opinion, Syria, where it's just 32 different factions shooting at each other one day and then being friends the other, and just total collapse and a hell state. And that's like the worst possible scenario. So I do feel like it's very much like we're on a ticking clock. And the only way to solve that is through kind of the methods that I'm going through of trying to unite like the anti-authoritarian left and right together on these issues.
The thing that's different about this civil war, and it is a civil war, it's just not quite a hot civil war yet, but it's getting there. It's certainly warm. Is that there's no clear geographical distinction between the sides, right? Absolutely. So in the 1850s and 60s, obviously we had the South and the North, pretty clear, even though there were some pro-Southerners in the north and some pro-Northerners in the south, but essentially that's how it broke down.
Still had the Mason-Dixon line, like all that.
Yeah, the Mason-Dixon line basically said, okay, those are the enemies and we're the good guys. Well, here nowadays, the people who are being called domestic terrorists, who are having legislation passed to prosecute them, right, live everywhere. Everywhere, even
and on both sides, because it's very specific to like point out that yesterday, I don't know if it was the FBI or the Department of Homeland Security came out and like officially announced that they were going to start actively investigating and engaging with domestic terrorists.
Yeah,
and then you go into their statement and they explicitly list groups like Proud Boys and 3%ers and stuff like that. They also include BLM groups and anti-fascist groups. And they try to like save it at the end of being like, oh, we're not saying they're similar or like equitable. We're just also looking into them, which is very much like a government sleight of hand. Like, no, that if you even include them on that list, you did that deliberately and intentionally. So it's they're about to drop the hammer on everybody. If you don't like the government, whether you be an anti-fascist in Portland or like Mississippi 3%er militia dude, like the government views you exactly the same in terms of how they want to handle you.
Well, a lot of BLM people are radical socialists, so that's not okay with the Biden administration. And even worse, a lot of BLM people are anti-Biden.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, like props to Portland, because one of the things that kind of like made me leave the left was when Obama got elected, I would like go to like my lefty friends and stuff like that and be like, hey, we complained about Bush like bombing Middle East. He's bombing Libya. Isn't this bad? And they'd just be like, whatever. And then like left-wing activism died essentially for the first 4 years of Obama. It fired back up in his second term, but the first term is like dead. So I was very much worried that we're going to have this again under Biden. But then on his inauguration, they were in like Portland, like lighting a police station on fire. So I'm like, thank God, thank God the revolutionary spirit on the left didn't just disappear the moment they got into office. At least in some sectors, you are seeing like a lot of, it's my favorite term. They're starting to call them blue MAGA, of like Biden supporters that act like Trump supporters and everything. We call them blue MAGA. And I'm like, you see a lot of criticism of them and a lot of people that are not ready to put down the torch, not ready to, to put down the pitchfork and stop being mad. So I'm like, thank God.
It's funny because I've always thought that Biden was the Trump of the Democrats. I mean,
he's Bush light. He's very much Bush light. They even announced today that they want to do an electronic border wall, which was a Bush Junior policy of literally like drones and surveillance cameras and stuff. He just announced that. And I'm like, wow, you are just George Bush Jr.
Yeah,
exactly the same.
Biden was very proud. He said it in a speech not long ago. I voted to build, I think it was it 700 miles of wall or something like that. He was touting his record as a wall builder.
Yeah. Obama too. Obama was like in his very beginning was explicitly anti-immigration.
And Clinton too. Hillary and Bill. Yep. So but I was that was all great. But I wanted to, you said at some point that you, at some BLM protest, you brought, I think, was it a sign of Duncan Lemp, or you? Oh
no. So like in the very beginning, I was just a spectator kind of it. Like I was in all the chat rooms and stuff like that, but I hadn't gone on the ground yet. But I like, it started popping up because I was involved in like the gun community and everything, just because love firearms, libertarian. I've always loved firearms my whole life, just being a military history guy, like guns are cool, So like through the gun community, there'd always been these Boogaloo memes, and then like there was the wave where like people started wearing Hawaiian shirts and stuff like that. And then the Duncan Lemp thing happened with Breonna Taylor, with both of them dying within 48 hours of each other. And all of these gun groups were very much like, hey, we need to do something about this. Like the whole, like, oh, they're coming to take your guns and everything like that. Like a man just got killed in a gun confiscation raid.
Right.
Like we need to get involved. And the only people that showed up to the protest for Duncan Lemp's murder was libertarians and anarchists. Right. All the Republicans and the 3%ers and the Oath Keepers and stuff like that didn't show up. And that was like the moment that like the Boogaloo movement, as we understand, created, because it's like, it was like dudes in militias and ex-military and like gun guys and everything that are like, okay, all these Republicans that said like, if the Democrats ever come take our guns out of our cold dead hands, just showed themselves to be cowards. Essentially, they're not actually going to stand for anything they believe in. And we've all, all of us were way more like friendly, if not directly on the left, than obviously a lot of those groups already. So we just split and formed our own thing. And I started identifying ourselves by the Hawaiian shirts because that's like part of the meme. And the first time you saw any of us on the ground was in the Virginia Lobby Day protest a year ago. There was just a couple handful of us around the giant gun march that had the Socialist Rifle Association was there, Black Panthers were there, John Brown Gun Club, armed Antifa were there, Redneck Revolt, plus like hundreds of thousands of other gun owners. And you saw a couple Hawaiian shirts in there. And then from there, it just like exploded to where people were going on the ground to these BLM events. And I was kind of watching this like from a side. And then also while that's going on from one angle, the other angle, which is another like form of government oppression, is the lockdown protests. So you started seeing Hawaiian shirts at BLM protests and lockdown protests like side by side. And that's when I think it was like a couple weeks from each other, because in April you had the lockdown protests and I saw Hawaiian shirts there and I'm like, okay, like I guess this is like this isn't a meme anymore, like this is something real, this is forming, like people aren't just talking about taking action, they're actually going out. And then just a little while afterwards we had the Detroit George Floyd protest that resulted in like riot cops like shooting people point blank range with tear gas rounds, and like people getting the hell beat out of them, like walking back to their cars by police and get shoved on the ground. And I was watching live streams of my old contact of mine, an old friend of mine from my eco days and everything on Detroit. And I kind of told her about the Boogaloo and everything. And she contacts me and she's like, hey, this dude's with Hawaiian shirts down here. And that's how I met Tim Teagan. And through Tim Teagan, like we started actually like organizing of like, okay, we're going to make an official Michigan Boogaloo group. Like we're gonna start getting together, like practicing, and we're gonna start showing up to events. And then I went to my first on the ground event, which was the Detroit Will Breathe protest in Hart Plaza in June, because they're one of the organizers from Detroit Will Breathe explicitly invited us to come down there. And a lot of people still to this day are like, oh, they're lying, blah, blah, blah. I have a live stream that was on my Facebook account that got deleted of me literally walking up and like them be like, are you our Boogaloo Boys? We're glad you're here. And then I have pictures I've even put on Twitter of one of our guys having a radio that has like BLM on it and everything that was given to him by the organizers to be there. So a lot of people like vehemently deny for political reasons that we were invited there and that we just showed up when we were 100% invited.
Cool.
But that was before the news stories. That was before the media got a hold of us.
Right. What was Detroit Will Breathe? What is
it? Was just local. It was the local like version of BLM. They didn't call themselves BLM because it's just a localizing of it essentially.
Referring to Eric Garner's chokehold. Is that the breathe?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Detroit Will Breathe.
Gotcha. I thought it was like an anti-mask thing.
No. Yeah, this was a local BLM, and they were putting on like a tribunal for the Detroit police, essentially, where like they were in Hart Plaza because it's set up like an amphitheater, like having speakers go through like all of the horrendous things that the DPD has done and gotten away with over the years, because it's the Midwest, it's Detroit and Chicago, police in these cities, infamously corrupt, infamously dubious in all forms and fashions. So.
Yep. Now, did you bring up Duncan Lemp with the BLM people?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
What did they say about that? Because
they had no idea, but and a lot of people, it kind of clicked in their heads because a lot of people were like, well, why are you here? You have no reason kind of to be here. And then we would bring up Duncan Lemp, and then we'd bring up similarities of like that and Breonna Taylor, and people would go, oh, okay. Like you guys are suffering too. This happened to you. And you saw like light bulbs going on in people's heads of like,
good.
Cause obviously people are in very much bubbles. Like you can't really, you can try to expect people in like the urban Black community to give a shit about what's going on in rural nowhere, but they probably don't. In the same way that like a lot of rural people they couldn't tell you a single thing about local city politics.
True.
But that kind of like popped both of those bubbles of like, oh, hang on, like this is going on everywhere. This isn't just happening in the city. Like this is happening all across this country in trailer parks and like population 600 towns, getting no-knock raids gone wrong. They burst the wrong door open and like flashbang a child or something. Like, this is happening everywhere. So that's kind of like was the bridge between that was the Duncan Lemp and everything.
Okay.
And then at that event was the event where a bunch of bikers showed up to that event, and we stood between the protesters and the bikers, and the bikers kind of got really pissed off with us. And I was standing on a balcony that overlooks a parking lot, essentially. So like maybe like a 10-foot drop or whatever. And there was down in the parking lot was all their bikes. And I was standing like there, like keeping an eye on that group of biker dudes that were standing like on that side of the protest, making sure they didn't try to like start anything like that. And one of the dudes, he had like one of those like folding camping chairs. He saw me and he looks right up at me and he reaches back and he pulls out a pistol and just goes like this and then sets it on his lap and just looks right at me. And I was like, and this was before I had the plate carrier either. So no bulletproof vest, anything. I literally had a Hawaiian shirt on, cargo pants, an AR-15 and a backpack. And that was kind of like a moment of like, oh, I just had a gun pulled on me. Like obviously it was like in a threatening manner. He wasn't trying to like shoot and kill me, but it was like a kind of like a, okay, let's go. But you know, might. Moment. Yeah.
But he might at some point.
He could have, yeah, he easily could have pulled that up and shot me. 100%. Just in the same way that I could have just pulled my rifle up from its sling and shot him. Yeah. So that was kind of like a moment of like, this is real, you know? Like this isn't like the police where they might like beat us up a little bit and let us go, which was my experience of activism always, you know, sit in the back of the paddy wagon for 3 hours and then no charges and you're released, sort of like stuff. Like this is kind of the point the country has gotten to, where people are straight up ready to fight and kill each other with their bare hands, if not arms and ammunition, over political differences outside of the police.
Over a lot of stuff, by the way.
Yeah.
A lot of violence in general. Crime has risen dramatically. And there's people like that horrific shooting in Scranton, Pennsylvania over the snow.
Yeah, I couldn't even watch that. That was so surreal. I was like, but it's the exact thing. It's this breakdown of society, and very much the thing I try to fight against the most is dehumanization of American to American has been so successful in this country.
Yeah.
I see it all the time where like people do not view people as like worth anything. Their lives do not matter at all, especially if they're outside of their little group.
Yeah.
It's like the value of human life has plummeted in America in terms of it, to where you'd see stuff like the Kyle Rittenhouse situation, or you'd see stuff like that Trump supporter that got ambushed and executed in Seattle or Portland, one of those ones where the guy stalked him and killed him.
Right.
Like outside of those events, you would go online and you would see people just like ecstatic and cheering that like someone had died. And and I guess the one part kind of what turned the Boogaloo movement into what it was today was that in Austin, there was a man named Garrett Foster. He was like a Libertarian Party member, open Boogaloo boy, very anti-cop. His wife was a Black woman who was a quadruple amputee, so like wheelchair bound. And he was going with her to protests in Austin, BLM protests, as a Boogaloo boy.
Right.
And he was shot and killed.
I know. Yeah.
And the moment that the Boogaloo Boys became like this even more decentralized, went from becoming this even more decentralized things that even had like Trump supporters in it and everything like that, and solidified into like the pro BLM, like everything I represent, was Garrett Foster. Because within our groups, you had people that are like, haha, commie got what he deserved. And then you had people like us being like, fuck you, dude. Like that's my friend. He literally died. Like you can argue whether he deserved it or not. You could argue whether the guy who shot was a good person or not, but you're literally cheering on the death of one of your own. Yeah. And the heated wars over Garrett Foster is where a lot of like the more traditional right and everything broke off from us. All the people that didn't want to work with BLM, all the people that didn't want to work with Antifa, the people that were more interested to go to protest to protect property from protesters instead of protect protesters from police, they all left the movement. And that's kind of like after Garrett Foster is where we 100% like solidified into what we are now, to where before that, like a lot of people will go like back before Garrett Foster and be like, look at this like traditional like right-wing dude. He was a Boogaloo boy. And it's like, yeah, that was before we had like this like cataclysmic split in the movement, and they stopped wearing Hawaiian shirts and everything. And we kept going was in the support of Garrett Foster, because he literally died protecting BLM protesters. And it's so funny that a lot of these like leftists and everything now on Twitter are so hateful and bitter towards Boogaloo Boys, and we're all fascists. Yet Austin BLM put on a multi-day memorial for him and like had like a giant like thing in the street of like flowers and candles, and the whole city came out to protest, and they talked about how good he was. And we even went to his memorial, like 30, I think it was like 35 people deep, and like as Boogaloo Boys, and like memorialized and eulogized him. And when the left discovered he was a Boogaloo Boy, a lot of people on the ground that knew him, their opinions didn't change or anything, but they went from like the New York Times and like all these like, you know, traditional media outlets and these left-wing magazines even talking about like how great Garrett Foster is and never forget him, and he literally died and everything, in the same way they talk about like the people Kyle Rittenhouse shot. They stopped talking about Garrett Foster. He immediately disappeared from the news because they found out he was a Boogaloo Boy. And that, I think they knew that would kind of screw up their smear against us and what they were trying to paint us as.
I knew the case well. I did not know he was a Boogaloo Boy. There you
go.
It works.
Yeah, he was like open and proud. He did not even hide it. And the banner I have on my Twitter profile, it's the gray and black Agorist anarchist flag. Mm-hmm. And then it has the Boogaloo igloo in the middle of it, and it's half red and half yellow. And that was the last thing he shared before he died, and literally said below it, "Come together." So it was literally like Boogaloo, like anarcho-socialists, like leftists and like right-wing people and everything like come together. And that definitely, like, he definitely became kind of like a martyr and sort of like an ideological North Star, I guess you could call it, for the movement now, of like, that's what we're trying to do. That was borderline his last words to the public. That was one of the last things he posted on Facebook before he went and died, was like literally pleading with all of the populist people, like factions of America, to come together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you were talking about the demonization of people, and even within movements, that they can turn on one of their own that quickly and basically disappear them as human beings, right? And to treat them as subhuman in a sense, right? Not worthy of lament for their death.
Yeah, exactly, absolutely. And like into that point, like JJ McNabb, which is the domestic extremist expert for Washington State University, she even shows, like, when she has her whole thread proving that Garrett Foster was a Boogaloo Boy, she shows pictures of our groups that we were like mourning his death and everything like that. Then it showed pictures of like pro-Trump Facebook groups where they were like literally laughing at it and saying like, he got what he deserved, he fucked around and found out, screw that commie scumbag and all that. And it was just like kind of like this moment of, not only did he die trying to promote unity, but it also showed like up front and center of like, people do not view people as people anymore.
Yep.
They you know, like there's that famous quote of like, they asked, I think it was like a Chechen mercenary or something, how he handled killing so many people, and he was like, they aren't people, they're communists. And that mentality, like whether it be left or right, is super in here. Like, it does not matter if you kill cops, they're cops. It does not matter if you kill BLM protesters, they're communists. It doesn't matter if you kill Trump supporters, they're fascists. Like that mentality is burned into the American like subconscious now on a really horrifying kind of level.
Yeah. So that's why I would call you, I think, a communitarian libertarian, and also possibly a humanist libertarian.
I definitely say so, because I don't really believe that anyone's fundamentally wrong. Like I don't think the Leninists are like fundamentally wrong, or the anarcho-capitalists are fundamentally wrong, or even like the religious, like in every one of these movements, at least in how America is now, there's a perfectly valid complaint against something that's going on that isn't exclusive to them. There's issues that all of these groups agree upon. And so like, there's not like a single philosophy, unless it's something like very explicit. Like, obviously I'm not going to work with the Klan. I'm not going to work with like, you know, people like the NFAC, which are like black separatist militia or anything. Like, if the foundational ideology is very bigoted or just awful, then no. But every other group outside of those, like they have a right to be upset. And the things, and at least one or two of the things they want are things that everyone else wants. Right. So it's kind of just like very much just empathy and understanding of their position, being from like on the left, then going to like libertarian, and then ending in like anarchy. Like, I understand the framework, the foundation of what they're upset about. And I don't view any of them as like totally invalid or incorrect on anything.
Right. So, yeah, I'm thinking about the long American tradition of individualism, but also alienation and isolation, which is a running theme through American literature, American films. If you look at American literature from the 19th and 20th centuries, right, novels, it's bleak and it's people alone out on the prairie or feeling alone in the middle of New York City, a lot of loneliness. And that's for, reasons that are pretty clear to people who know American history, right? Because we just have all sorts of things that are
Yeah.
conspiring to enforce that kind of loneliness among Americans, right? At the same time, it's what we love about America, and in particular libertarians, right? Libertarians are individualists. And yet I think you're pointing to a deficiency in libertarian ideology, which is that we also, our lives are at least better in community.
Yeah.
Right. And I mean, they're not opposed to cooperation. I get that, but it's just, it's sort of
it's like a trend. It's a trend in among those people that they happen to be like shut in, very isolationists, very like not. They're not putting on barbecues for their local neighborhood kind of people.
right. But for libertarians, it's just ideological. Like it's transactional and ideological, right?
Yeah.
Relationships. This is a libertarian argument. Are ideological, meaning friendships, romantic relationships, all are transactional, I should say, right? Which is fine and really smart. And I use that and it's changed my life. And I really think it's a great intervention in many ways, but it's also lacking something else, which is that there's a psychology that you possess that a lot of libertarians don't possess. And I think it goes back to what happened to you in high school and earlier, right? That you have something that might be called empathy, right?
A rare substance, only found
Yeah.
in the most remote of dark caves nowadays.
Yeah. And I don't really believe that anybody can really feel exactly what anyone else is feeling, but there is something, whatever you want to call it, you care about other people, people who are strangers, people who you will never know. Now, I think it tends to be people who share interests with you, who are victimized in ways that you have been victimized or might be victimized in the future, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's a wonderful thing to hear and see, especially among a self-described libertarian anarchist, right? That the community is really important to you, and being a part of it.
Absolutely. And definitely like it's funny too, because I feel like my one particular part of my life has been some weird training leading up to this moment of I was one of the first kids in high school to get a car, which I think that was another part of the reasons of like my slow regaining of popularity and being normalized as people, is I would be the kid that'd be like, hey, can I give you gas money? So even people that would call me homophobic slurs would eventually be like, dude, can I throw you 15 can I throw you $15 to drive the 45 minutes to the movie theater? Because that's how remote of a town it was, and through that, I made a lot of like friends in different friendship circles. Like I had my very nerdy straight edge friends. Then I had like my emo kid friends that were very like punk and stuff like that. And then I had like the smoker jock friends. And then I had like my redneck friends that I went and shot guns with and stuff, And I had like this like weird, it got to the point where I almost describe it as a fetish almost of like, I loved making people hang out with alien friendship groups. I loved taking like the nerdy kid that like played World of Warcraft and never like smoked weed or went to a party in his life and dragging him along with me to like my redneck friends that are like blasting country music and shooting like guns and drinking beer. And I did a lot of like meshing of friendship groups. And I don't know why I started doing that. I just definitely did. And you could ask like a lot of my friends that like, there was a lot of people that would have never turned out the way they kind of did if it wasn't for like, hey, like, like Catholic conservative friend that like we play like D&D together with, come with me to this bunch of hippies like smoking weed and dancing around a maypole. And I've always liked that of watching people kind of expand their horizons and like get experiences. I'm very, very experience focused my whole life. I'm not very material. I'm very much about just like doing things I'll always remember. Yep. And making people happy. That kind of goes like taking care of my mother and massage therapy and stuff like that. Of like, it's very, very almost submissive kind of personality of like, I feel really good when I do things that make other people happy, and more often or not to like my own detriment. You know, like, so.
Do you think it's maternal? Would you call it a maternal impulse?
Yeah, probably. There's definitely a lot of that. I definitely like a lot of my friends will get like annoyed with me because I try to get them to escape like our hometown in northern Michigan and be like, come to this whole new world. Like you can live with me and whatever, and you'll get a job and like you'll be making more money and you'll get out of our depressing no town. There's definitely is kind of like a naggy mom, I guess, thing to it of like, I know you can all do so much better. Like come with me. Cause really up until very recently, I was the only person in my friendship group that escaped. Like almost everyone else is still there, still living in that tiny town, like went to college and came back even like
what?
Yeah. Cause that's how those small towns kind of operate. Like they're black holes. Like,
yeah,
most people end up getting a criminal record or knocking somebody up or like not being able to like learn to socialize in like an urban city or whatever. And they just come back home and they live and die there, you know?
Wow.
So
yeah, no, I think, well, I think your impulse, or you have a drive to take care of people.
Yes, I would definitely say so. No, I'm obviously not the best at it. I'm still have like, it probably falls into like some form of narcissism sometimes where it's like,
but politically,
like I know best sort of thing that I have to be very aware of and like check of
right.
like not telling people, like not thinking I'm a savior for somebody. Cause I've definitely had that in like individual interactions and having to be like,
right.
Don't be an asshole.
Right. You can be right. The danger is you can become paternalistic and patronizing and controlling and all that stuff. Right. But, you know, Jimmy Dore paid you a great honor, by the way, by comparing you to none other than Fred Hampton for this reason, right? Because Fred Hampton, the great Black Panther in Chicago, who was assassinated by the Chicago police with the help of the Chicago Fire Department, that's what he was all about. He was unlike many other Panthers. And at the time, some wonderful speeches everybody can watch on YouTube of him, which he's talking about Black people, white people, yellow people, brown people, all coming together, you know, to in a coalition to pursue their common interests against a common enemy, which for him was primarily the state, you know, the police violence. And
and a lot of like leftists currently are going through this revisionist history, which I'm so happy to talk to you about this because I know this is bullshit. Where they were talking about Fred Hampton only worked with I forget their group, the white Confederate like import group that they worked with, the Black Panthers. But he only worked with them because they were socialists and even though they were racist and from the South and everything, they agreed on the economic policies and nothing about Fred Hampton. Like he wasn't giving like long-winded diatribes about like the evils of capitalism. It was very simple of like, hey, we're all getting screwed. So it's just like they to try to justify their isolationism in team sports, they trying to like rewrite history of like, no, I only work with racist white socialists, but not non-racist, non-socialist white people. I guess is how they try. It's so surreal. I've had a very interesting 2 weeks on Twitter.
Yeah, I bet. But Jimmy was saying, you know, what happens to people like you and Fred Hampton who try to bring people together of different backgrounds against a common enemy, they end up getting, well, you said this, I think, they end up getting disappeared. Or murdered.
He said explicitly killed, but I said disappeared because of the ones we know that got publicly killed, there's probably uncountable people that just were never heard from again. You'll never hear about in history and never hit the paper of just like some dude just grabbed on the street by the cops and killed, and you never hear about it again. And that happens way more than the public like murders and stuff.
Yeah. Because you know what, Magnus, if we have a movement of the friends and family of Breonna Taylor and Duncan Lemp and George Floyd and the countless white people who have been murdered, shot down like dogs, if we have them all joined together in a movement, that will actually shake the criminal justice system to its core, and we will get serious reform. And we might even get actual police abolition and have the police replaced by private security, by community security, by neighborhood watch groups, by all sorts of things. That's when things will really change. But right now you have white
code enforcement, essentially.
Right now you have white people across the country who have done time in prison, who know someone who's done time in prison, people who know people have been killed, beaten, had their stuff stolen through civil asset forfeiture, who are not invited into the BLM. They're not part of BLM. BLM is not speaking for them. BLM never speaks for them. They don't want to speak. They don't seem to want to speak for them. So they don't have a voice. And yet there's right now, there's 500,000 white people in prison right now. And yet there's no organization that represents them because
BLM, and there seems to be like active, like, because obviously it's definitely not just like BLM's fault of like within the white community, particularly among like Trump circles and stuff like that. They've turned to embracing the police and like the thin blue line and stuff like that kind of things, to where like our whole movement started because we're like the usual conservative criticism is like, why doesn't anybody like riot or protest when a white person is killed by cops? And I'm like, well, we tried to do that and none of you showed up. So if we have to be the group of like, because we're only probably like 2/3 white, but still, well, you know, for the sake of the argument, if we have to be the group of white people that are going out and protesting white people being killed by cops, and that doesn't exist, then we're going to fill that hole in the market. Like the Boogaloos are going to be the people that protest white violence, and you know, and we'll do that. And at the same time, we will reach out to BLM and stuff like that and try to foster this whole like.
No, you will just protest violence, period. Right? It doesn't matter.
Absolutely.
It doesn't matter. The color doesn't fucking matter.
But absolutely, like if we show up to an event of a white kid that got killed in a no-knock raid by police and there's nobody else there but us, then fine, we will be the only people.
Yes.
But if anyone else, like if there's a giant protest for someone else because like there's actually a movement for that group of people and justice for that group of people, we will also show up to that.
If the cops unjustly kill someone or brutalize someone, you will be there. You don't give a shit what their color is.
Yeah. Or even like who they were as a person. Cause you know, there's so much like post hoc justification of like George Floyd or whatever. Like, oh, he was a criminal and blah, blah, blah. And he's like, okay, then he should have went to jail. Shouldn't have been killed. Like, you know, like Ahmaud Arbery, any of these people, they didn't deserve to be killed.
The cops should never have shown up to George Floyd. It's a little incident, right?
Yeah, absolutely not.
Yes, he had a lot of fentanyl in his system, but the cops certainly didn't help the matter, and they shouldn't have been there in the goddamn first place, and they were treating him like an animal from the minute they got there. But they just shouldn't have been there. They just shouldn't have been there. Cops,
it should. That goes to like the whole drug war thing of even when I was on InfoWars talking to them, they acknowledge that probably 75% of these awful interactions between like people and police start from like marijuana, not even like hard drugs. Like there's probably uncountable number of people that have been beat or shot or even killed by police over pot.
Really?
Like, you know, because it doesn't matter what starts the interaction. The moment someone starts resisting or running away or acting, that's when people die. Right. So like, because of the drug war, you're having more and more interactions between police and people, and those interactions go bad afterwards. Right.
All right, let's talk about the Boogaloo movement, and then I'll let you go. So first of all, what's with the Hawaiian shirts?
Yeah, so like it kind of depends on who you ask, but we definitely, it kind of came out of during the 80s and everything. There was this sort of soldier of fortune kind of like mercenary thing that was going on across the world of all of these African conflicts and these Middle Eastern conflicts and Eastern European conflicts. You had just like random dudes getting involved in like private militaries and private militias and stuff. And a lot of these people, like they were like American tourists almost. Like they wore like Hawaiian shirts. Like you'd see pictures of like Irish mercenaries fighting in the Congo alongside like Congolese revolutionaries, and they'd be there in like flip-flops and like boy shorts with like a Hawaiian shirt on. So like it kind of came out of that, a little bit of that, and then under the Bush eras and stuff like that, U.S. Special Forces were like infamously like over independent and like didn't give a shit at all about like grooming standards or whatever. Right. So you'd see pictures of like Navy SEALs and stuff, again, like Hawaiian shirts, beards, like drinking everything. So it like that kind of caught on with that whole like Boogaloo idea. And I guess just through the way weird meme culture works, like you start seeing like pictures of George Washington with like a Hawaiian shirt on and stuff like that. Okay. And that's kind of like, it just organically grew out of the internet, like so many weird things do, where you can't really like pin down why or where it started. You can kind of justify after the fact, but honestly, who knows? You know, maybe there was a single picture of a dude in a Hawaiian shirt with a gun, and that's where it started. You know, like, so who knows?
It's kind of tough but ironic. Is Yeah. Both.
And it's also very disarming because like we embrace like the absurdity of it. Like, like literally you have the US media like talking about like a bunch of goofy, like weed smoking libertarians in Hawaiian shirts as like the scariest thing in the world.
Yeah.
And like to a lot of people, they look at that and like, if it breaks through the cognitive dissonance, they go, wait, this is kind of stupid. Like, look at these guys. Like, really? You know, like, you know.
Do you ever feel like a communist in the 1950s?
Yeah, sort of. Just like people just immediately looking at you and just not understanding what the hell you are, or where you're coming from, or like your whole like.
They assume the worst, actually.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like, but I think that fear comes from the ignorance of like they look at you and they can't connect you to any like nerve center already in their brain, so they just immediately go to like bad. And that's the same thing that happened to Anonymous. Like nowadays you'll see Guy Fawkes masks and stuff like that at every protest and they're widely welcomed. But when that movement first started, it also came out of 4chan, which is like where a lot of like Boogaloo memes and stuff came out of. It came out of an even more racist board than we did. It came off of the random board. And in the very beginning, like there was crazy news stories trying to paint them as these psycho, like cyber hacker, domestic terrorists that were like trying to break into the Pentagon and destroy the country. And there was like a lot of high profile arrests of like anonymous activists and stuff like that. And the media ended up failing with them. And now it's part of like pop culture. But I think they're trying to replicate like the same smear against us because we are a very similar movement in terms of structure and ideals and stuff as like the Anonymous movement was.
You do have, and Jimmy Dore was very interested in this. You do have some, I guess what you call I think you called them racist idiots, who identify as Boogaloo Boys, right? People you want nothing to do with. But how bad is it? How many are there? Like, and where is it?
We stumble across them like very rarely.
Okay,
but I definitely like they were very quarantined before we all got banned off of Facebook because our entire movement got purged off the internet, and they would pop up and we would all just dogpile them and just like scream them out. And then they would organically leave themselves to where now that there's like censorship and everything and like we can't communicate with each other and we're so blown apart everywhere that like we don't know who's doing what or whose belief. And there's also obviously you're going off of like Twitter leftist scales of what a white supremacist is.
Right.
Very different reality, you know?
Yes.
But no, like we have no control over who identifies as us because there's nothing, you know, like, and that's the same for anything. Like there's literally nothing stopping like a Sig Heil swastika arm tattoo dude going out and just buying a BLM shirt and then going on the street and calling himself a BLM protester.
Sure.
Like, you know, there's nothing anyone can do about it. And no other movement is held to the same standard of like, there's psychotic, like black separatists and like super racist people. And then even like closetly racist white people in the BLM movement. There's bad people in Antifa. There's bad people in the 3%er movement. Like there's awful people that voted for Bernie Sanders. There's awful people that voted for Donald Trump. But our movement is the only one that holds the same standard of like, oh, well, there happens to be small groups, which every single source admits, like very small pockets of your movement that are white supremacists. Oh, well, you better either totally abandon the movement and call yourself something different, or you're complicit in their existence.
Right.
We are the only organization out of everything that's going on, whether it be Proud Boys or anyone else, that is held to the same standard of
like, it's worse.
One drop rule, essentially.
It's worse. They define your existence, right? That's how they're used. Yeah, right.
Exactly.
That's who you are.
And it's funny because like, especially like recently, because after the Garrett Foster event, a lot of those people left the movement because, you know, they're like, oh, these guys are standing with BLM, they're race traitors and stuff like that. Like they, you know, so they already self-ejected themselves and they didn't want to be identified with us traitors, essentially.
Cool.
But now you have new people that are only discovering us through the media. And what happens when you Google like, oh, I saw a dude with at a protest that has a Hawaiian shirt on. He goes home and he Googles like, oh, it's a white supremacist organization. He's like, well, I'm a white supremacist, so I'm going to start like parroting that and start wearing Hawaiian shirts and stuff. And then like he'll find somebody, he'll get on the ground with them and actually start talking to us. And then he'll be like, so you guys hate black people, right? And we'll be like leave, you know, like where did you get this? So ironically, the media doing this full court press lie about us has caused more Nazis to affiliate with the movement than before, because, you know, like if you put yourself into the mind of a white supremacist, like they parrot symbols, they appropriate things, and they get very invested in the culture in something. So if their only experience with the Boogaloo movement is people telling them it's white supremacist, then they think it's white supremacist. So then they start identifying as Boogaloo until they eventually like actually talk to one of us. And then they like usually have very public meltdowns I posted one on Twitter of a page being like, oh, you know, I thought these guys were based and cool, but they're all actually a bunch of just traitors and stuff like that the moment I actually started talking to them. Right. So it's like the media has caused the problem more than anything else with our movement.
Of course. Yeah, of course. Well, they've basically made the Boogaloo Boys, or contributed to making them into what they want them to be, right?
Yeah.
By doing this. Yeah. They've brought the white supremacists into Boogaloo movement by pointing out to the white supremacists, hey guys, that's your group over there. And they were like,
yeah, go join your team. And then they actually talk to us and they just get totally culture fucking shocked. If they're like, whoa, you guys are actually a bunch of commies. Cause like, that's the funniest thing is, as I tell people all the time, like you see the left go after me as hard as they do, but like I was like doxxed by like neo-Nazis and stuff, and like had my ex-wife's phone number on the internet, and she received like death threats and stuff of like, you know, because I'm not fully white. I do have like Native American in me. I have a little bit of Middle Eastern on my dad's side and everything like that, like being called like mud blood and like all these like racial slurs and everything. So like I get it just as bad from both sides. It's just they're in such bubbles that the far right thinks that we're like heroes of the left, and the far left thinks we're heroes of the right. Well, in reality, like they both fucking hate us. Like, you know,
right. is the one thing that unifies everyone in the movement the guns.
Yeah, it's mostly guns and a willingness to resist the government, and most importantly to never view people as the enemy. Like that's kind of a foundational. Like you can have disagreements with Antifa, you can have disagreements with Proud Boys or Trump supporters, you know, pick your group, but they are never the actual threat. 100,000 of the group or ideology you hate the most will be infinitely less terrifying than the US government and all of its might and surveillance and weaponry. Right. And that's like a very fundamental thing you have to get into your head, that is very unique and widespread in the movement, is just never viewing people as the enemy. It is always the government.
I like it. How big is it, do you think?
I mean, at our peak on Facebook, like before going through like a couple schisms, like we had pages with like hundreds of thousands of members.
What?
Yeah, like the biggest page, Big Igloo Boys, the last time I checked, it had 66,000 people in the US that were part of the group. Jeez. And that was just one page. Right. And there was hundreds and hundreds of pages. So I definitely think like it's way bigger, and especially like, you know, a lot of people have gone underground because they don't want, you know, a lot of our members are either active or former, you know, military. Yeah. And you see what's going on right now with like the Biden administration looking for people so it's definitely, and obviously like there's two kind of halves of the movement, even though we're all the same. There's the group of guys like me that will go out to events and protests and stuff like that. And then you have the prepper dudes that like, they agree with us going out to protest and they still hold all the same like ideology and everything, but they're at home like training and like learning ham radios and like building like compounds out in the woods and stuff. So like it's definitely kind of an ice cap effect to where the movement you see is just a tiny fraction of kind of like this huge sentiment that's going through sort of the like libertarian and anarchist community with this.
I was just trying to think. I just love your politics, man.
Thanks. And it's funny because like you're like me, like I said, me and you are very similar, and I've always been like a fan of yours. So like there definitely some symbiosis and similarities there.
It was meant to happen. Thanks. Before. Yeah.
That's why I got so excited when you DM'd me lately, like my heart dropped. I was like, oh God.
I had no idea. I thought you were blowing me off. I thought you were a big media star. You were like, who's this podcaster guy?
I guess that's the point. Like, I guess we could like touch on the J17 thing really quick.
Let's do that. I want to ask you what that was about.
So all the way back in like over the summer, the entire movement like came together, and a lot of because there's independence in the movement, and then there's organizations, like whether it be a state organization or we have like general national kind of like chapter stuff. There's like organizations like the Liberty Vanguard or the Hibiscus Society and stuff. So it's very much, you know, all over the place, from fully structured like rank systems all the way down to just like random individuals and everything in between. But we all kind of came together and we acknowledged that no matter who won the election, it was going to be hell and chaos and riots and shooting. And if whether Trump or Biden won, it was going to be bad. So we picked J17 because it was close enough to the inauguration that we knew that like that would be kind of like this last moment of like, hey, you know, this happened. Let's come together after this happened and like, let's keep this ball rolling regardless of who won. So we started making like flyers about it and everything and planning. We're going to do it in every single state capital. And then the Capitol Hill riots happened and the FBI got a hold of it and they assumed we were Trumpers putting this on when the whole point was a unity march. Like my everything in my speech and several other speeches that other members of our movement gave across the country were all about just unity marches, like coalition, come together. That was the whole point of it. All of our flyers, like each one addressed different issues, trying to like say like, hey, like this is all the stuff you have in common. We like, if you're mad about this, we can be mad about this together, sort of idea behind it. And then, so I went out with my guys and I almost didn't go, but I finally decided I would. And we pull up to Lansing and we park in a parking structure. And we like get our bulletproof vests on, our rifles and everything. We meet up with the local BLM organizer that we had been working with all, you know, summer long, and the local anti-fascist organization that we had got really close with, a couple ladies in that group. And we all walked in together. And as we're as we leave the parking structure, like military helicopter sees us and just flies right over and starts circling above us. So it was kind of like, fuck. And there would have been a lot more of us out, but we were kind of worried that it would be like a trap. Like they were essentially like the reason why the FBI had blown it up and gotten like the National Guard even in so many of these places and like made it seem like there was going to be this assault on everything was to either scare people away or that there was going to be like some Kent State 2 situation where we just show up and we all just get murdered. And I was just like, screw it. Like, I don't care. There's definitely kind of a belief in the Boogaloo movement that none of us are going to live to see what we're trying to accomplish. We all kind of accept that we're going to get Fred Hamptoned at some point or another.
Wow.
There's definitely, you know, it's so like, we think it's important enough that, you know, this isn't like something where we think we're going to be like Rambo and killing the cops and save America. It's going to be a big, glorious revolution. Like most of us understand, like we're probably the first to go. If we were going to be this public about our opposition to government, you can't pretend that if an authoritarian government comes in, you're not the first to go. And there's not much you're going to be able to do about it. So I was like, screw it. I'm going to go out and give this speech. And I went out there in front of all the cameras and the snipers and everything. I gave the speech and then I immediately left and I went home. And I still don't think it was very like great of a speech. They only show 30 seconds of it. It's a 3-minute long speech, kind of like going into like laying out all the events that happened and kind of showing that all of America is mad. And like my last line of like, American people are going to become irrational. I wasn't talking about me and like the Boogaloo Boys and stuff. I was talking about like old ladies getting into fist fights over toilet paper at Walmart. Like the country's going to fall apart if you keep doing what you're doing. So you need to stop. And I didn't think anybody would care. And I thought like nothing would happen. And at that point I'd been banned off of Twitter. I'd been banned off of Facebook. Like I had no social media presence. And I wake up the next morning and I like get on my computer and I start like playing video games with my friends and everything. And my friend hits me up and he's like, so your speech is on Twitter and it has 20,000 views. And I'm like, oh fuck. Wow. And like I don't like being like a public figure. Like I'm very like introverted and like very like shy. Like I love helping out, but I don't want to be like leader or figurehead at all. Like the idea of that is still uncomfortable. When people say like, oh, you know, now introducing the infamous Magnus, I like cringe on the inside. You know, my pronouns are none. Address me as nothing kind of person. You know, and that entire night, like we're like playing video games and I'm like having anxiety attacks. And I'm like in chats with all the other like Boogaloo Boys and everything being like, I'm freaking out because I'm sitting there, I'm watching, it's like 100,000, 300,000, 400,000. And like by the next day, it was like 1.1 million. And I'm like, oh, and I'm like, I guess I better make a Twitter account. Yeah. So I made a Twitter account. And I'm like, why? We got to do something about this. You kind of like, I don't want it to be me, but fuck. You know, like, here we go. Like I'm stuck here now. I can't just let it die. So I made a Twitter account and then I got reached out to by a guy. He runs a podcast called Liberty Lockdown. And it's just like a general like libertarian kind of, you know, podcast. He found me first and I went on his show. And then through him, Jimmy Dore got a hold of me and then it's just been. Alex Jones, like Nico House,
Thaddeus Russell.
Fucking. There's so many times that like I'm like, even this moment I'm sitting here and I'm like, this isn't real. Like this is like last week I was talking to Alex Jones, which like I used to be like a really big Alex Jones fan, like way back in the day when he was way less conservative and more like anarchist Alex Jones, when he was like smoking weed with Joe Rogan, wearing a George Bush mask, like talking about how they're all baby killers. So I was like, wow, I'm talking to Alex Jones. And like I've always like Jimmy Dore and like, you know, George Carlin and everything. So like I was like, oh God, I'm talking to Jimmy Dore, and now I'm talking to you, and it's like, what the fuck? And all I did was give a good speech, I guess. But I guess
it's a great speech.
I guess words matter to the, I guess I just undervalued how important words can be to some people.
It's a fantastic and riveting and purely original speech, the likes of which I've never heard, except possibly from Fred Hampton. But even there, I think your speech was more specific, grounded, direct than, I mean, I love Fred Hampton's speeches, but I mean, it was, you go through a lot of specific issues around which lower class Americans, meaning Americans outside the political class, can and should unify around, you know, and to fight for their own common interests. It's a wonderful speech. Do you have a copy of the full speech?
Yeah, I have it all saved on a Google document still.
All right, we're going to end this episode by playing that full speech. I want everyone to hear that.
Oh, I don't know if I have the video. I have to.
No. We'll splice it in.
Okay.
Just
cool.
give it to me after this, and we'll splice. I want the episode to end with that speech. I want everyone to hear it. Magnus, thank you so much for this. You have beautiful politics, and you're a beautiful man.
Thank you. You as well. The biggest of praise. Thank you so much. I'm happy to have here. I'm still just, like I said, just some random idiot. So I'm hoping to
do
you are
something not
good with it. So
no, you are not. Godspeed and good luck, brother.
Thank you. You as well.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
What we are witnessing today in our country did not come out of nowhere. To many of us, it was not only expected, but inevitable. A year ago in Virginia, the largest gun rights rally in the U.S. was held. A section of all political movements were in attendance. Not only right-wing activists, but also BLM organizations, John Brown Gun Club, and anarchist groups. A man was interviewed and he said something that stuck with me. He said that the people you see before you today are all rational people. We will talk to you, we will compromise, we will be peaceful. However, if the country continues down the path it is on, you will only have irrational people, and we do not want that. The sentiment was ignored, pushed aside, laughed at, and marginalized. Months later, the horrific murders of Breonna Taylor and Duncan Lemp by the hands of police occurred within days of each other. Among panic and fear of a global virus, tensions boiled over. An entire summer of riots, police brutality, and tyranny followed. Shortly after, I was interviewed in this very spot, and I echoed the sentiments of that man. It does not matter how you feel about these groups. BLM, Antifa, Boogaloo, 3%ers, right-wing militias, they are not the irrational ones. If the government continues to be illegitimate and tyrannical and uncaring, this summer will be nothing compared to what is to come. Christmas Day, a man drove an RV into downtown Nashville and detonated a car bomb. Weeks later, angry Americans stormed our nation's capital. Now, as every state does in its death throes, the government lashes out further. 30,000 National Guard are deployed to D.C. Weapons of war roll down our streets. Social media megacorporations launched a purge of all left, right, and libertarian voices who oppose the political establishment of both parties. This may be the last chance I get to warn the government of the United States. The people before you, we are the rational ones.
This is the Unregistered podcast, and I'm Thaddeus Russell. To join the new Renegade University, go to renegadeuniversity.com. To join the new Unregistered Underground, the supporting listeners group for the podcast, go to unregisteredunderground.com. Thanks for listening.